would like to welcome you all to this very interesting panel on geopolitical challenges and the security of the EU. Of course, geopolitical challenges and security covers many issues today. It's about security and defense and the future of transatlantic relations. It's also about war and Russian aggression. It is about the rise of China. It's about the war and instability in the Middle East and geopolitical competition in Africa, etc. And it's about the challenges linked to technological shifts. There's a lot of things to cover. And also the responses to these challenges should therefore also be manifested, which means that the EU, which is about to be a geopolitical actor, is something that we need to cover in a broad sense and in a more narrow sense when it comes to European defense. But it's also about enlargement, as we talked about earlier. This is also part of geopolitical or security of the EU, as we discussed. It's about building a balanced partnership with Africa, and it's about how to handle migration. And it's about democratic resilience, in particular resilience against hybrid threats of different kinds. So this is what you are supposed to talk about. Now, this is just to say that this topic is, of course, very huge, and we will, of course, not be able to cover everything in this panel, but we have a very distinguished panel that will cover parts of these things from different angles. We have decided not to go in the order of the program, but I will present you in the order that is says in the program. So I would like to welcome or introduce first Anna Molnár, Head of Department for International Security Studies at the Ludovika University of Public Service. She's going to talk about the growing role of the European Commission in defense policy. And then Magdalena Góra, Associate Professor at the Institute of European Studies at the Jagiellonian, I hope I got it right, Jagiellonian University. She's going to talk about the European Parliament election, what to expect from the new House with regards to security of the EU. And then we have Luigi Scazzieri, Senior Research Fellow from the Centre for European Reform, who's going to talk about EU's half geopolitical awakening. And finally, Gunilla Herolf, Senior Associate Research Fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, who will talk about the war in Ukraine and the role of the EU as a security actor. So my suggestion is actually that we go in the opposite order. And the reason for that is I think that it's good to start kind of with the bigger picture and then go down to the European Parliament election and end by that. So this is why I will first introduce Gunilla. So you can, so then the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pernille, and thank you for inviting me here. I'm very happy to be here. It's always nice to be in Budapest. And as Pernille said, I will speak about the war in Ukraine and in particular about the EU as a security actor. And I will bring up different aspects of this very wide subject. Well, first of all, what we have seen during the last few years are huge amounts of humanitarian aid, economic and financial assistance, political and military support, etc., that has been given to Ukraine through the European Union and much through the European Peace Facility as well. But much of the focus has been on the sanctions. Of course, this is the tricky area and it has become more and more difficult. But they have succeeded this far to gather the countries around it. The sanctions, according to the EU, are measured to weaken Russia's economic base, to deprive it of critical technologies and markets, and to curtail its ability to wage war. As it looks now, they include also Belarus, Iran, and North Korea, and they are directed against more than 2,000 individuals and entities. In late May, the Council took another step forward when it included the windfalls of profits from frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. The effects of the sanctions are very difficult to judge. As we know, they have not prevented Russia from continuing the attack on Ukraine. Since Russia's export is much driven by energy, this has made it more difficult. Oil export to Europe is reduced, but increased supplies have gone to India and China. And when it comes to gas, the EU is divided. On the recent issue, barring the re-exporting of Russian liquefied natural gas, Hungary has been, or is, the most reluctant country, but they are not by any means the only one who are hesitant about this. There are quite a number of others too. Russia has also been able to import sanctioned goods by buying them from other countries like Georgia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, and it has received vital components for its military production from China. On the other hand, they have also lost. They have lost about 1 million of young and highly educated people, and more than that. It is impossible to predict. Some economists say it will become worse for Russia, but we have so many question marks on the horizon, so I wouldn't dare give any kind of prediction. There is another area as well in which the EU has acted to solve the situation as an actor in security, and that is, of course, to invite the 3 countries in the eastern part of Europe, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, as candidates for membership. We immediately saw the Russian reaction to it, no surprise, came quickly, just as we saw similar reactions from Russia in 2014 when the EU were advancing some other measures for them. And it is no wonder that Russia does this. A country being integrated into the EU is like a big display window showing the Russian population what a different life people in the West have. The EU and the candidate countries therefore have to be prepared for more Russian revenge as the process advances. It will not be an easy process anyway, since the candidates, in my mind, and I think this is the decision by all countries in the EU, have to fulfill the criteria. If we are lenient on the criteria, we will import big problems for our own countries, and we will not help the countries themselves either. And this is also what we have seen, unfortunately, during the very long years that we have been working with the countries in Western Balkans. They have problems fulfilling the criteria. They are not always friends with each other. And again, as usual, we see Russian infiltration. That is very powerful. Also some Chinese. So membership negotiations will take time. That is unavoidable. But so will also the war in Ukraine. And considering what we, I think, all agree on, is that we will have a process that is to gradually phase the candidates into the EU, because I think that will be the only way of keeping their hope up, having them receive more and more benefits for everything they do. It also means, I claim, that the EU, having these countries closer and closer, will have an increased responsibility. An increased responsibility while having Russia pursuing its revenge will be a tough issue for the EU as a security actor. I'm not so sure that it will be up to it. Maybe it will be also part of a NATO task to have some kind of deterrence along, to the extent that we have NATO. I will come to that. 42.7 has never been seen as particularly powerful anyway. I think we can agree on that. The third aspect is what we also agreed upon in the European Union, and that is when we are having an enlargement of the Union, we also need to have a reform of the EU itself. And that is not particularly easy. We have to be more efficient when there are more of us, but we also have to have more cohesion. I have 2 examples here. One, I think, is a bit sad. We're talking about now the countries that have been in the EU for 20 years. Still, they correctly notice that they have a much smaller share of the highest positions in the European Union. This is something that we have to change. And then, of course, the obvious one, the lack of unanimity on Russia. This is not good for an organization that wants to be a security actor. You have to have the countries in question behind you. There are ways in which we are working with this now, and there are proposals being put forward. And I just have one point to make here, which is in my own interest, my own region's interest, so you have to forgive me for speaking for myself. If we have now a new rule with QMV, which means that the countries that have the larger population will have more of a say. We can all agree that there is some sense in doing that. That is fair. But on the other hand, if we look at the situation right now in Europe, we have in the north 3 EU countries with small population and three Nordic EU countries, I should say. And then we have 3 Baltic countries with even smaller population. In a QMV, it would be very easy for the larger countries to overrule these 6 countries that cover quite a large part of Europe. If you then think about the situation where this northern part of Europe is extremely strategic, we may have a problem if we don't integrate these countries better. 4 of them, in addition, are also countries that, if the war spreads, will become frontline countries. The 3 Baltic ones and Finland. So think about this again. Can we find a solution to this? Because we have to. Then finally, about the United States, of course. This is what we're all thinking about all the time. Within less than a year, Donald Trump is probably the president of the United States. We hardly think about anything else, as I said. Contrary to last presidency, he will not be able to leave NATO because of the law that the bill that was passed in December 23. It requires quite a lot for him to leave. But he can do other things. He can, for example, withdraw his support to Ukraine. Yesterday came a glimmer of hope, I would say, for all of us who watch the news. The 10-year agreement by the United States, which is supposed to be Trump-proof. It should be valid even during a Trump administration. At the same time, we learned about the G7 giving a major loan with, again, the frozen windfalls of the Russian money as a security for the loan. We have Stoltenberg, who has worked on several measures in order to make it safer for us, even if we have Trump. And then coming back to what I was supposed to talk about, the EU as a security actor. Now I think we are getting closer to President Macron. This is what he has been talking about. The EU has to step up as a security actor, also to have the friends of NATO joining, like the UK, Norway, possibly countries like Australia, etc., etc. And in the very best case, and let's hope and pray for that, we may survive the next 4 years. That's my hope, with some luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunilla, for this very interesting and first overview of what the EU is doing as a geopolitical actor. And it was a very good start, and you ended on the transatlantic relations and the uncertainty. And I will give the floor to Luigi, who will talk about the more kind of the defense or the half-awakening of the EU, because of course you ended on saying that now we're a bit worried and we hope that we will survive. and the half awakening has to, I guess, we have to have a full awakening, I guess. But look forward to hearing your thoughts on that.
Indeed, we do. And thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I want to take as my starting point a remark that High Representative Borrell made when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, which was that the EU had undergone a political awakening, a geopolitical awakening, a belated geopolitical awakening. And the argument was that Europeans had really stepped up. They'd agreed a set of sweeping sanctions on Russia. They were providing Ukraine with extensive military support, indeed, including through the European Peace Facility that we just heard. And they had helped arrange a global coalition against Russia. And Borrell's argument was also that Europeans were moving towards a shared understanding of their security interest, most specifically in the case of Ukraine, because they understood that this was an act not only of solidarity, but also of self-interest. And we also saw a spillover of that in the economic field, with the EU, with the issue of economic sovereignty being pushed up the agenda, and the EU taking steps to improve its resilience in areas like critical infrastructure, access to raw materials, domestic production of chips and semiconductors. But here we are now, and it's been over 2 years since the remark and since the invasion. And I think what we have seen is in many ways a half awakening. Yes, we have been able to maintain sanctions despite our internal differences and despite the sanctions not being as strong as many member states would have wanted. The support for Ukraine has deepened, both in military terms, but also in financial terms. We have the enlargement perspective as well. And the EU's own involvement in security and defense has grown. We've had not only the provision of weapons through the peace facility, but also a joint procurement of ammunition. And we have a set of measures, although very embryonic, I must say, in the defense industrial field, that have kind of put the EU on the map as a more substantial defense actor. And on the economic security side, we have the economic security strategy, and again, a set of steps that are incomplete, but I think were triggered not only by the war in Ukraine, but also by what came immediately before, namely the pandemic, the supply chain disruption that stemmed from that, and the decoupling from Russian oil, which made Europe much more painfully aware of its dependence on China when it comes to, for example, the technology that we need for the green transition. But some things also have not changed, and I must say others are not as impressive as they look at first sight. So I'm quite skeptical that we are seeing a broader geopolitical alignment or alignment of interest between the member states. I think there are a lot of issues to work out when it comes to our approach to Ukraine in the first place, when it comes to the issue of enlargement. But more broadly, I think we saw that with European policy in the Middle East, or, for example, with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. You know, when there's no pre-existing consensus between member states, there's still, of course, no mechanism to generate a common response because of that need for unanimity still. And the second reason for caution, I think, is that while the EU's role in terms of defense has grown, the trajectory, to my mind, remains very much unclear, in the sense that many of the tools that we like to herald actually have substantial issues. The European Peace Facility, for example, is also hamstrung by the need for consensus, and many of the reimbursements to the tune of 6.5 billion out of 11 billion are being held up by Hungary. More broadly, there was also a reworking of the peace facility recently, with Germany being quite skeptical of the whole notion of essentially communitizing security contributions to Ukraine. There's an argument that it's much more effective to just give aid bilaterally. The joint procurement of ammunition, yes, the EDA now has a channel, the European Defence Agency has a channel to procure ammunition for Ukraine, but that framework contract has not been used much. In fact, we've seen, again, that member states often prefer to go ahead through other channels. And in terms of defence industrial initiatives, as I say, they are very much embryonic. I think they're used on the map in terms of research through the European Defence Fund, but whether it really ever manages to step seriously into procurement, I think, is a different matter. And then we have, of course, the EU is not the only player on the map when it comes to European security. We, of course, have NATO. And, of course, we also have many unilateral and small group initiatives that many countries prefer because of their greater flexibility, the ability to work in small groups of like-minded countries, and their speed. And so, for example, when it comes to the provision of ammunition to Ukraine, there we have had the Czechs step up very strongly with the procurement of ammunition from global markets. And the third reason why I would kind of be cautious about this narrative of a broader geopolitical transformation, we've already heard quite a bit about, and that's the Trump factor, which I think is a major unknown variable. I very much agree that I kind of fear he will be re-elected if we look at the fact that he's leading in many of the swing states. And I think a line that we heard yesterday is that it would make sense to think that Trump's presidency might accelerate or deepen some of the EU's initiatives. But I don't think that's a given, because the temptation will be for European countries to deal bilaterally with the US as much as possible, especially those that really need the US security guarantee. Trump will play that card as much as he can and try to weaken European unity. He's also, unlike in his first term, where he was unfamiliar with the levers of power, he didn't really have staff that was prepared or willing to serve in his administration. Now there's a whole ecosystem of America First think tanks in Washington producing long policy papers about what America First administration can do. And so if we take Trump at his word and we, go ahead with believing that actually he will cut assistance to Ukraine, and he may even, despite the legislation passed, take steps that really undermine NATO. I mean, if he says, I'm not going to defend allies, the legislation will remain a bit of a paper tiger, I fear. And it won't stop him, unfortunately, for not turning up at summits, for example, or not appointing a US ambassador to NATO. So there's, I'm afraid, a lot of things that he can do without withdrawing. And so what would we see? I think we would see European defense spending deepening very substantially, but not necessarily in an EU framework, partly because also EU defense tools being, in the eyes of the US, very protectionist. And so Trump essentially hates them and would stymie their development. But look, so just to conclude, I think clearly the European Union is in a phase of transition. I think it's come a very long way and deepened its involvement and its role as a security actor very significantly in the past 2 years. But I'm not quite sure where we go from here.
Thank you so much, Luigi. Very interesting. And now I think it's you end with saying where do we go from here? And I think that one of the things that we have seen is the increasing role of the European Commission sorry, I looked at it. Role of the European Commission, and maybe that is one important thing that could be a game changer when it comes to stepping up and having a greater role of the EU in defense. So I give the floor to you, Anna.
Okay, can I?
Yes.
Oh, I'll just,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation as well. I'm going to talk about the defense and the role of the European Commission in the field of defense, which is quite a new thing, of course. When we are talking about, for example, my colleague Bob Larkas talked about Europeanization or also other concepts and theoretical background, we can also mention the historical institutionalism, which can explain how this whole process developed during the last few decades, because when we talk about Europeanization, now it's a top-down process coming from the Commission, partly. And there are some very important, but also on the other hand, it's a bottom-up, because there are some very important member states like France who Macron talked about European sovereignty. It's on the table. Also, the so-called many other initiatives in this field. So it's another concept could be also spillover effect. coming from internal market to the defense industry and defense market as well. But when we see the European Commission is the most European institution of the European Union. We can say that. In that field, it is the Council and the European Council which has a major role in decision-making processes, but we can see now that it has become a policy entrepreneur during the last decade, and mainly after the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So it's started to have an effect. And we are after European parliamentary elections, so we will see also who will be the next president of the European Commission, but not only the president, but also the vice president, who is also High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. It's a double or triple-hatted position, High Representative. Now it's Josep Borrell, who will be the next one. We don't know it yet, but I think that soon the whole process will start with the European Council, and after going to the European Parliament, von der Leyen would like to have a second turn, but there are other names as well in that period. Factors behind. We can mention, first of all, because now this is the year of anniversaries, 20th year of membership of Hungary and other countries in the European Union, but also 25 years of the membership with NATO, which is also important, and the 26 years of the birth of the CSDP, Common Security and Defense Policy of the European Union, which started at the end of the 90s. The driving force was the devastating experience of the Yugoslavian war, when Europe recognized that didn't have any tools to intervene for crisis management. Now the situation is very different because there are many different, we say that it's a comprehensive approach, where also the European Commission, but other institutions, very important role to intervene and to give answers to, for example, to the Russian aggression, like also the Council, the European Council, and so on. Russian aggression started, when it started, it's a hybrid warfare, so it started much earlier, but we can say that 2014 was a very important year with the annexation of Crimea, and after that, of course, full-scale war started in 2022, which changed again everything because war came back in Europe. So it's again here, it's at our border, and it's changed everything. Brexit, it was a window for opportunity on one hand. On the other hand, it weakened the European Union in many ways, in the defense as well. But on the other hand, it was a window for opportunity because UK was one of the countries which obstacled further integration in the field of security and defense. But at the end, that was not the case because everything started with Saint Malo Declaration, 98, UK and France. But after it was more country which obstacled and Euroscepticism and so on. So that is why it was a window for opportunity. And also there was a decreasing military expenditure in Europe. That was the result of the financial and economic crisis. And the world is changing. Now we started after the Second World War with a period which changed, and after 89 we entered unilateral world order, and now we are talking about multilateral world order, when the role of the European Union is also in a certain way questioned. But during this period, we can see that the role of the European Commission strengthened in many different areas as well. But that also started during the 90s. And there were very important steps, for example, during the Barroso Commission, some significant steps between 2004 and 2014. For example, when the so-called Defense Agency was created in 2004, but that was a very intergovernmental institution of the European Union and not related to the Commission, but to the Council. And the reason behind was that not many EU member states supported the Commission in that field. But for example, José Manuel Barroso said that we will not have the weight we need in the world without common defense policy. Common security and defense policy was created at the beginning of 2000 with the name of European Security and Defense Policy. It was renamed by the Lisbon Treaty 2009. That's why it is the policy area, it is the youngest policy area of the European Union. What's changed? As I said it before, it was annexation of Crimea, watershed for Europe, Brexit 2016, and the global strategy also 2016. And after that, the implementation started, and we can also see a growing role of the European Commission in this field as well. Someone mentioned qualified majority voting, and to introduce it regarding CFSP and CSDP. That would be very difficult, but the European Commission in 2018 proposed to introduce qualified majority voting for CFSP and CSDP. That would be possible only with the amendment of the treaties or with the use of the so-called passerelle clause. But in that case, it's not possible to use it for military and defense policy areas. So. And what was also very interesting, 2015, when the president of the Commission said that European Union would need a European army, which will not happen, I think, but the process started with the implementation of the global strategy with a lot of things. European Defence Fund, that was a game changer because EU money is possible for defense industry, and also there are other initiatives as well, CART, coordinated annual review on defense and so on. But still, that is the year also and the period when later 2019, Ursula von der Leyen started her first Commission, saying that she would like to lead a geopolitical commission. And also Borrell said that the European Union must learn the language of power. And of course, that was supported by member states on the other hand, and which was also very interesting in 2024, when Ursula von der Leyen, during the Munich conference, she said that I am going to be the next president. We don't know it yet, maybe not. She would like to have a commissioner for defense, which would be a big change in the field of, in the case of the European Commission. But, and I think that will be, we don't know who would be, there are names on the table, Sikorski, for example, Foreign Minister of Poland, for example, we will see it. But, and also in 2000, I would like to mention in 2017, the Juncker Commission prepared a reflection paper on defense, and they proposed to create a so-called European Defense Union for 2025. We are in 24, I don't think that we will end up and arrive to defense union next year, but there are many important things and there are many important initiatives, and the European Commission role is strengthened in the field of defense, and we will see what is coming next year and this year as well with the new Commission.
Thank you so much, Anna, and that makes it feel you have been very good at creating this transition to the next one. So now we will hear a little bit about the European Parliament election and how what implication the new Parliament may have precisely for security and defense. So looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I know that you've heard yesterday about the entire panel about the European Parliament elections that all of you follow very closely. And I'm sure that you had in a recent couple of days full feeds full of the information about the EP. But I will nevertheless try to bring some points about what can we see. Primarily, not as much looking as the EP as an institution, but rather looking at the partisan actors and what they say, what they do, and maybe what we can see is gonna be the results of this. And of course, as you all know, and maybe you actually even fall into those categories, there is a group of people that are, see the glass half full, stating that what we saw is rather that the expected far-right surge was not as high, and that the mainstream parties, the EPP in particular, maintained the central position, assuring the continuation on politics and policies in the House, and as a result, also possibly in the entire institutional setup, particularly in the Commission. The pessimists, so rather the glass half empty, but they not necessarily only focus on the fact that there is a observed increase in the overall presence of right-wing and radical formation in the EPP, but what they primarily looked at is how the results from the elections immediately destabilized political scenes in some of the member states, and notably the member states that are crucial for EU foreign security policy. And of course, I'm meaning France, but there is more countries that need to think about it. The German leadership of the ruling coalition, I think, is really sitting there and looking at what happens. And again, one of the events that is even more telling is the meeting of the German parliament, in which both the radical left and radical right was not present at the meeting, was the Ukrainian leadership, right? So what those elections are telling us that there is, so how these results will translate into the EU security and defense policy in the forthcoming month, I don't know. And probably we can build entire long meeting on this. But there are some points that I think we can at least draw at this point. The first one is about the right-wing informations that enter the European Parliament, and they are also growingly visible and dominant sometimes in the national scenes. They disagree, we know it, on many fronts, which prevents them from forming a unified alliance within the European Parliament. But what we also noticed, and it was quite visible in at least some of the national scenes that I looked into, is that they are growingly presenting more and more similar views on the future of European integration. And that aspect, despite of deep differences between the right-wing parties on the European continent, the similarities in how they see European integration are possibly one of the avenues for them to build a coalition. So we call them sovereignists, right? Everybody knows the term. And how they gonna form really the alliances is something that we only see in a couple of weeks, probably, and the decision by Macron to organize the snap elections probably will even push that in time a little bit. But what they express, what they have in common is, I think, pretty important to notice. The constitutive element, of course, is the defensive stance focusing on protection of national communities or community from the destructive forces of globalization, right? This sovereignist claims were long present in right-wing Euro-reject or Eurosceptic groups. What is quite interesting right now, what happens is that these narratives are growingly present and become popular among the voters with their idealized place and time, the promotion of some form of a nostalgia in which this return to the strong nation state, the sovereignty, is a kind of useful founding myth for romanticizing the past in opposition to the contemporary, globalized, dangerous reality in which the EU and its institutions are central and form a useful other. But sovereignist, drawing from nationalism, nativism, populism, Euroscepticism, and sort of reproducing those elements all together in a political phenomenon, what they clearly communicate is that they want a different type of integration, which some says is basically the idea of having cake and eating the cake at the same time, and that it's not very consistent internally, that you cannot have it what they propose to provide, but nevertheless, this is, at least to some of the voters, attractive. What I think is the key, and that is something that brings me to the points brought by Gunilla already, is that as regards the future of integration and the reforms, they will certainly be interested in limiting as much as possible the competences of any supranational institutions, particularly European Commission. So all of what we talked about, those plans and projects in a table, will probably be they will be against, even though, of course, there was a piece in Politico, I think yesterday, about the ECR, and there they still put security as a common interest with the EPP and Ursula von der Leyen, but that is something to be seen how this can be combined together. So one of the key points that I see problematic is that, as you all know, and it was already mentioned, we have the proposal in the House on the treaty reforms. And that reforms, many countries put as a condition for enlargement perspectives for Eastern and Southern EU neighbors. And it seems that this will be specifically difficult for the European Parliament to build coalition around. So we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, how to reform. And I'll just bring just a small reminder that even the EPP itself, right, at the moment, the anchor of the politics as we know it, right, the business as usual in the EU, they were very divided over what to do with this the resolution, right? And Koalicja Obywatelska, the Polish second bigger member now in the EPP, voted against the EP resolution in the end of 2023. That is about the qualified majority voting in two areas that are relevant for today, enlargement for this panel, enlargement and security issues. We know that most certainly the sovereignists will oppose it, but what will the EPP do about it? It's a key and open question. And I'll just want to bring, or again, brought you to Warsaw for a second. In very end of April, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, also mentioned already, presented a Polish foreign policy priorities to the Polish Parliament. And of course, he was for, strong Europe, strong Poland in strong Europe, sort of very much reversing the trend that Poland was showing in the recent 8 years. But he also explained very clearly the Polish skepticism towards the treaty change and specifically to the voting reform. And he said, we will face a dilemma as a country, whether to agree to a treaty reform in which we may have to make compromises, or whether to close the path to membership to our eastern and southern neighbors whom we support and whose accession will be beneficial for us. And he then he presented several options for the qualified majority voting, options, what kind of majorities, what kind of solutions, and then he appealed to the Polish political partners, but I think this appeal is to all of us today, is he said, he appealed for thinking out of a box, and he said, I declare my personal openness and the ministry that I lead to every constructive idea how to solve the problem of qualified majority voting concerning enlargement and security. And I think this is the task ahead of us to think today. Of course, this is the group that does that on everyday basis to provide deep thinking and ideas to politicians. But I think we need to go back to the discussion how to make that process easier in terms of making decisions, how not to allow the blockages that Luigi you've mentioned when it comes to the defense spendings, but not at the same time seeing this in the frames of possible treaty reform, but rather as a different solution, and then how to satisfy the voices that I express now, I'll be somehow quoting my own government, and Gunilla, you express on the countries that are close, right, to Poland, just by the Baltic Sea, that are basically skeptical toward QMV, but they are not saying that this skepticism is worth enough to block any compromise when it comes to enlargement with the countries that are willing to have that reform. But how to organize it seems to me really more complicated than it was never easy. And now it's even more problematic because of those changes. And on top of this, I'll add two points. The one is about the personal sort of this politics that is changing on the European level and national level will certainly have an impact on who's gonna lead the key posts, right? We only gonna see, I'm not gonna join to throwing the names. All of you probably are following all of those who are sending the gossips, who are on the lists close to this position. But one of the things that is clearly visible also after the elections, that we don't necessarily fully know what is the portfolio on defense in Commission, what is gonna mean, right? It was from the kind of promise, pre-electoral story that now some countries that were eyeing these positions are saying, no, maybe we want to go somewhere else because, this is gonna be technical, it's gonna be industrial, and it's gonna, in the end of the day, only, benefit Germans and French defense sector. So, and I think that's another game is, right? We have this promise, and then the reality check is that, well, we'll see who's gonna be the next defense commissioner, if that position is gonna be open up. But then let's see also how prominent it's gonna be and how the countries will play this game. And the final thought about the electoral results is about the peace dividend. And I think this is something that really, to me, is the most worrisome aspect of this. Of course, the House will have a say when it comes to the budget. We all know it. It's gonna have a say when it comes to the multi-annual financial negotiations that will speed up just after the elections. Again, we all know it. There is the proposals on joint borrowing to fund defense investments on a table, right? Whether they're gonna be still on this table, we don't even really know, because the promoters are now primarily interested in the in-house business or local national affairs. But if you actually look at the results of the elections to the European Parliament, it seems to me that the idea of mobilize citizens to think about how we should spend the money on defense and convince citizens that we need to shift money from some areas into the defense at the expense of those areas, or education, healthcare, or what else you have, is actually causing a backlash. And this is something on national level. And, you know, the Macron in itself, he was trying to convince with every good argument at hand that this is the only way to pursue. And then he got that result. Whether that's directly related is too far to say. But what I think is important to see is that this discussion about the peace dividend being over and sort of need to rethink our national spendings on defense is gonna produce a lot of problems, particularly for mainstream parties, how to react to this, because it seems quite easy to be utilized for the mobilization of electorates for the parties that are sovereignists, that sort of use this argument of not going that way. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you so much to all of you. I will now open the floor. I would just, I think that the question is, to try to bring it up again, that it's a question about, is the glass half full or half empty? And I think that what you talked about, that we need to have the people kind of have to back this defense, I mean, spending on defense in order to be able to produce results. I think that is crucial. But of course, there is a sense of urgency now that, of course, that could make it possible to, and that is also why the most countries managed to increase the budget to defense budget to 2%, because there is a support for it for now. But it depends for how long that will last. But when it comes to the EU as a geopolitical actor, EU is often at its best when there is an urgency. The challenge is to find, to be willing to find compromise to how to be a geopolitical actor. And maybe there is this kind of, we have seen now a division of labor between NATO and the EU that is clearer. But I wonder, there are still some challenges between these two organizations that I wonder if that hinders the capacity of the EU as actually, or Europe, to be able to defend itself, to be able to have strategic autonomy, if we should use that, because it's not, the EU cannot do it by itself. So we have to look at both EU and NATO. And there are some skepticism on both sides on how to do that. So I think that one of my ideas is to think about European integration in more differentiated integration, where you think of the EU as the core, but you also have NATO as an important player in that. And you have to see all this together in order to be able to create a European security and defense, and not only EU security and defense. And I would like to hear your reaction on that. But we have a lot of questions, so we'll start here. And then Jim, and yeah, I will. Can you raise your hands again so I can have all of you?
Hi, thank you very much for these presentations. I had a question for Gunilla, but if anyone else wants to go and chime in. So I'm Michelle Chang from the College of Europe, by the way. Sorry for not introducing myself. Back in the day when I was studying international relations, when we came on the topic of economic sanctions, the general lesson I remember from many years ago is that they generally don't work. And so given the experience that we've had the last few years, do we need an updating of our thinking on the utility of economic sanctions?
I think we, in the interest of time, I think we will have to take all the questions, and then I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I am Erzsébet Rózsa from the Institute here, and also from the University of Public Service. I have one remark which is very closely related to that, thanking the whole of the panelists because they were leading us through very complicated thing. I have the impression of the European Union that it is always trying to improve itself, as you said in your final remark, that trying to go forward, trying to compare, trying to develop. Gunilla said that that there is also a reform in the EU itself. But however, what I see, maybe I am wrong, that in order to facilitate all this, the European Union still uses a lot of old tools, should we say sanctions, And I think Gunilla mentioned it in her remark that sanctions toward this country, that country, and that country, and that country, and that country, and then these countries can make up an anti-sanction coalition. This is globally now an issue. So sanctions, shouldn't the EU think of something else than sanctions? This is one thing, and maybe defense would be an idea. And the other remark is that if, well, no one has mentioned, with regard to geopolitical challenges and security, no one has mentioned migration. Of course, we had a panel on migration. But here we have the European neighborhood policy. What are the aims? The aims are the very same as the Copenhagen criteria that an applicant country has to fulfill. And Gunilla, you said, I think you mentioned Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, plus there are 3 others in the eastern neighborhood. So isn't it time for the EU to realize that it is, that maybe we should not correct, but do something new? And I think that there is a lot of thinking at the moment in Euromesco. We are doing a lot of work on that how to compare with the neighborhood policy and the Union for the Mediterranean. Should there be 3 separate institutions, the global strategy and so on? So I know it's very difficult to step over these, but I think this was a remark.
And then Jim.
Thanks very much. I'll just make a small remark. There's a lot of talk about the Commission running defense policy. It's not going to happen. It's the wrong question. What we're talking about is the EU getting into defense? The answer is yes. What does that mean? It means we need a defense industry. Key role for the Commission. It's not running defense. And I would point out something. You have to think a bit about, there is in the treaty a function which is called High Representative, who happens also to be Vice President of the Commission, who is actually in charge of running ESDP and CFDP. So the idea to put a defense commission on top of him would actually completely make his position impossible. And he, by the way, or she, chairs the council, the FAC, and in the formation of the defense. So the only thing I would see in this respect is empower the HR more than what von der Leyen has done, because she hasn't allowed him to work at all. That's the reality. Then you have already the embryo of a defense commissioner. And then you can give to Borrell a commissioner who is specifically looking at defense in terms of defense industry. But do not talk about a commission defense who would be like a trade commissioner. It's not going to happen. Thank you.
It's good because I can relate my question to this. I didn't know what you are going to ask. So I would like to, I'm not a defense expert, but I would like to ask your opinion about it. So Europe, at the same time, when Europe is looking for more competitiveness and finding an innovation route in the global world, has ambitions in security and defense. So do you see any, because I think that security and defense industry and innovation can be connected. So what are do you see any policy proposals there? Because I think to fulfill these objectives, one thing is sure, we need more money and more competitiveness. So what are there any policy documents that connect these 2 ambitions? And what are the suggestions? So in defense industry, so do we see any line when Europe can come up as a competitive global player in innovation and defense industry? So do you see anything? So I'm putting economics on the table and I'm asking what is your opinion in that? Thank you.
Okay, and then we will just take a small, Anna will reply because she has to leave. So I will wait for 2 more questions, but we take that after. So Anna, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comment on defense commissioner. I said that defense commissioner because it was said by Ursula von der Leyen. She said that in Munich and later as well. I know, but you are completely right, because, for example, in 2019, within the European Commission, a new DG was created for defense, industry, and space. This is the so-called DEFIS, which was a very new thing, but of course for defense, because national security belongs to the competencies of the member states, of course. CSDP is mainly about crisis management. It's not territorial defense, because territorial defense is mainly about, belongs to the NATO and to the member states. So it's a very complex questions. We also have the 42.7 article. We could go further, but does it mean as well? So it's, but she said that Commissioner for Defense. I also would, now I would say that it will be a Commissioner for Defense Industry, probably. The name will be that, but we don't know it yet because it's going to happen soon. About documents, yes, in 2024, a new strategy was also prepared by the Commission, Defense Industrial Strategy, which is very important because there are strategic thinking for the European Union. The strategic compass 22, this new industrial strategy, it's another strategy which is good because strategic thinking set the goals for the near future about industry. And this is also about spillover. From common market, we are now arriving to defense industry and defense market, which is a very sensitive part of the member states and the less integrated part as well. But step by step, something is happening. I did not talk about other initiatives which are not really related to the Commission, but what is happening with the Commission is a very new thing, I think, and very important as well. Of course, a high representative, vice president of the Commission as well, on one hand, but that is for Defense Council wouldn't be possible without the amendment of the treaties, but the Defense Commissioner, that is possible without the amendment of the treaties. But I'm really sorry, I have to go before. I have another duty as well at 2 o'clock.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. And we have 2 more questions. I think we need to take them, and then I give you the floor to you so you can give your reactions. Yes. And then, after that.
Hello, I'm Cordelia from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I've also been at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, and I'm an American. So 3 different hats. First, on the Trump thing, don't resign yourself to it yet. Act as though Trump is going to get elected, fine. But I think wait until August to see how Democrats run the abortion issue, what happens with Gaza and the protests, what happens with Ukraine, and how Robert Kennedy Jr. pans out as a third-party candidate. Wait to see what happens. And the polls have been wrong before, as we all know from 2016. But then to the questions. Magdalena, I would be curious to hear your perspective now with the EPP, and as Poland is the second largest party, whether we're going to see a shift in the center of gravity, especially as the Germans, despite being the largest party, are maybe feeling a bit politically weak, and then how that might pan out. I think to all the panelists on the migration topic that was raised by my other colleague, Frontex is maybe the closest thing that the European Union has now to a large agency that is growing, it is uniformed, it is armed. Poland and Finland are facing security border issues, the Greeks, the Italians. So what is the potential for Frontex to be this space to go through? And then finally, my Nordic counterparts on the panel, and Pernilla, though you are chair, I would be curious to hear perhaps your perspective as well. Gunilla, Sweden and Finland, new members, we're talking about integrating NATO members into this EU security capacity. What is the space maybe for the Nordic-Baltic area to shape that as this kind of new membership and this space to expand? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we take the last question from Jaap.
Thank you very much. With a certain hesitation, but the idea, although it's not new, but has not been mentioned, and perhaps I address my question particularly to Gunilla, the European Security Council. I mean, in light of the enlargement, we have to come up with something new. And obviously, I realize it's very difficult to achieve and to implement because it has an effect on decision-making and whatever, rotating membership, what have you. But I think in an academic context, we are an academic here, we're having an academic debate, we should discuss this issue because we could provide for a Security Council composed with a number of permanent members not having the right to vote. Obviously, there are certain stakeholders which have to be a member as well, the President, European Council, High Representative, the Chair of the Commission, etc., etc. And we can provide for new modalities with regard to decision-making, including modality for blocking minorities. I mean, that was also raised by the Scandinavian countries. But that is something which I would like also to present in light of geopolitical challenges, security of the EU. I think it's important. So again, as an academic framework, we must not refrain from presenting new ideas.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, we are a bit out of time, but I guess we can go a little bit over time since we started a bit late, I hope. So I'll give you a few minutes, and I'm starting with Gunilla and then Luigi, and then... Yeah.
Thank you very much for the many questions. First, Michelle, I was also taught that sanctions didn't work, and I think in most circumstances they don't either. First, I believe that this was probably a gut reaction. You have to do something, you did something quickly. Second, I think in a certain, they have worked to a degree. When I described that Russia could not sell as much oil to Europe, I said also that they were selling it to India and China. But in particular, China has taken advantage of the situation and they have to sell it as a much, much lower price, which hurts Russia, of course. Second, I think it's very much due to us, how we were late thinkers when it comes to Russia. The signs were there for many years. I would say the first sign about a changed Russia came in Estonia with the Russian soldier statue. The second one we should have really noticed was Georgia. And so many countries said, this is just a little dent on a development that is going very well. We had the speech in Munich in 2007 as well, I think, etc., etc. If we had prepared ourselves better, the sanctions would have worked better, because how Russia found Europe in 2022 was large parts of the continent were highly dependent on Russian oil and Russian gas. And I don't blame the countries who initially said there's no possibility that we can stop heating our houses or stop working with our industries and so on. So I think in many cases the EU has done what it could do, which was certainly not perfect, but I wouldn't take out sanctions as one of the measures. And Russia is suffering to a degree, I don't know really. Elizabeth's question about reform itself, it wasn't really developed because of an idea that you would have something else than sanctions. It was about the sheer number of new countries within the European Union. Could we have the same decision-making in a union of 35 countries as in a union of 27, and all the EU countries said, no, we can't. So that was very much the idea behind. Then I don't blame the union that they hadn't found out any really good ideas afterwards, because it is really difficult and we have to take it seriously. And I think your kind of thinking is excellent. We should work on that to find maybe not the simple idea, maybe a very messy idea, but the main thing is that we bring in countries. We don't let countries be totally outside our thinking, because that's detrimental in the end. Something else than Copenhagen? No, I think Copenhagen criteria are excellent. And if we delete the fight against corruption, where are we then? I think we have to stick to it and stick hard to it and help the countries in question as much as we possibly can. because they need our help. It's very difficult for a country that has never had a Western democracy suddenly from one day to another to go to this. It's almost impossible. So we need the help. Now I'm trying to, I think those were space for Nordic, Baltic, they are excellent, I would say. I have never seen so much cooperation between the Baltic countries, Baltic Nordic countries. I was at a conference in Copenhagen in April, and the audience said after some time, this is getting boring. Can't you disagree on something too? That would make it more fun. And then someone said, maybe in another situation when we are not in danger, because we all perceive we are in danger among the Nordic Baltic countries. We are not all in the front line, but we are very close to it. So also we think we have a good case to present because we have been working so closely for so many years, not only up in the north where the Norwegian, Finnish, Swedish air forces have been working together, training together every week for more than 10 years. It's amazing. Many other things could be said, but one thing to Magdalena, the Swedish government has spoken positively about QMV. It's me who says it, and some other researchers who read proposals and see maybe it is not such a good idea, but there are good things with QMV too. So I stop there.
Thank you, Luigi.
Thank you. Lots of interesting questions and also really interesting debate, I think. Let me first just a very brief word on QMV. I think at the end of the day, those shades of grey, to my mind, disappear in the sense of you can think of mechanisms by which, yes, at some stage, constructive abstention, or if it's a really essential interest, then you maintain a veto. But at the end of the day, either you have it or you don't. So I suspect either it will be fudged, and countries will say, okay, we got what we wanted, it's fine, it safeguards our interest, it's enough to go ahead with enlargement, or it will be enough of a deal to block it all. On NATO-EU, well, clearly the war has clarified to a degree the relationship between the two, largely because of the membership now having more in common than it did after Sweden and Finland joined. And also with NATO having re-established unquestionably its primacy when it comes to any sort of discussion linked to security, deterrence and defense. But there is a lot of, the relationship between the two institutions remain incredibly complex and difficult still, not least due to some of the EU's initiatives in the defense industrial field and the degree to which these initiatives, of course, being based on a treaty basis of industrial policy, are not open to other allies, or apart from Norway, which is associated, of course, but not to the transatlantic allies or to the UK or to Turkey. So that inserts a degree of tension between the two organizations, also because NATO has expanded its role in these areas as well. There's now a NATO Innovation Fund. There's something called Diana. So NATO is also doing defense investment more than it did. Defense Commissioner, I think we already have one de facto. His name is Thierry Breton. It doesn't only handle defense, but he has a much larger portfolio. And I expect if we have one in the next commission, that may well be by having, it is going to be someone in charge of the defense industry. Institutionally, it's too difficult to have anything else. It would go against the treaties. There is a very clear attempt to broaden the discussion of defense to competitiveness. And that I think is one of the main aims of the defense industrial strategy and the defense industrial program that the Commission put forward. I mean, the logic essentially is twofold. On one hand, providing EU subsidy for industry to make it more competitive, to encourage it to expand production. And on the other side, also working on the competitiveness sense to really create an EU-wide defense industrial market. So you're putting carrots on the table to try and incentivize companies and countries to work together, to incentivize mergers, economies of scale, and so on. But really, the skills discussion is very much present in that debate as well. Finally, perhaps on the neighborhood discussion, I mean, I think we're moving encircled to a degree. Of course, the EU has very appealing incentives when it comes to countries to which it's willing to offer membership, much less so when that's off the cards. And also the EU's willingness to offer an attractive package is limited. I mean, we are fairly protectionist in terms of trade, in particular when it comes to the kind of market access that countries in say, North Africa and the Middle East would want, and the mobility for their citizens that they would want. And also the sort of symbolically close political ties that don't have that emphasis on migration that the EU often has. So I mean, we can rename it, we can separate it, we can try and make it more tailored, but I think those fundamental dilemmas will remain. And migration, I mean, I don't like to think of it as a security issue personally. Of course, that's what's happening, but I think it's much more of a, as I outlined yesterday, and indeed also in the recommendations, of a foreign policy challenge that needs to be thought of such. Of course, there's the border control dimension, and that will always have a harder edge, but that's only one part of the story.
Thank you, Magdalena.
Thank you, and I will try to be brief. Thank you very much for the questions, points, and I will just pick up very few. I think one of the important points to really think about is that the urgency and emergency politics is really not a long-lasting strategy to keep the policy legitimized. And I think for the defense, security, spending in that areas, we need to think it through that this will wear off among the citizens, and there needs to be a better set of justifications. Why do we need that? In a sense of convincing citizens, right? And building a domestic strategies. So that's the one point. The second one is about the EPP and the center of gravity. And of course, Central Eastern Europeans hear it for quite some time. And I think in the previous panel, we also had that discussion, right, about this. It never happens, right? We hear it and never happens. But I think there's two, and of course, Donald Tusk is a, experienced European player, and that gives him and his party a significant position. But there's also threats there, I think. And I would like to just pinpoint on two things. The first one is that a lot of Polish commentators were sobering sort of the moods after the electoral night and saying that, yes, of course, Tusk win and Civic Platform or coalition won the elections. But if you actually look at the numbers, half of the seats is the pro-Europeans and half of the seats of the Polish delegations are Eurosceptics and the radical right-wing parties. And it's 27 to 26, if I calculated well. So if you compare it to the German delegation, there is much more pro-European forces in that delegation, despite the, shocking for many result of AfD. So that one thing to pinpoint. Yes, they were gonna be the second biggest. They're gonna have Tusk. They're gonna play the game. But, overall optimism, but I think limited. And the second point is that, putting this high hopes on the Polish EPP sort of part is also bringing the issue that von der Leyen was already indicating famously during the Eurovision debate, is what to do when it comes to some sort of a cooperation with the moderate Eurosceptics or moderate parties within the European conservatives and reformers. Like she mentioned Meloni, right? We see her pictures today and yesterday. But that brings the problem that in Polish case, the law and justice is part of the CR. So I don't see how, Polish EPP part will actually be very willing to bring the ECR closer to the mainstream, since you have this agonistic nature of domestic politics. And this is not only Polish case, right? The parties within, I know that the European game is different than domestic, that you have to do more, and that the previous House had a lot of the instances in which conservatives supported the crucial points. But I think, and I hope I'm wrong here, but I think that they've learned the lesson that this is not good for them very much to support the mainstream parties in so things. If you want to prove the Green Deal and how they shifted immediately their opinions on this, even though they supported it before, because their voters were not happy. And so I think I see here a little bit of a limitations for this sort of leadership role, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. A very interesting panel. I will not try to sum up everything, but I like to be optimistic. So I think I will end of saying that, in my view, after listening to you and also to the debate, I think the glass is more half full than half empty when it comes to EU as a security actor. The challenges will not go away. You have to find a solution. And I think that the EU, as I said before we started the discussion, is that the EU is often at its best when there is a crisis. Now there are too many at the same time. I don't know if we will cope with it, but I think there is a time, and we will see there will be creative solutions. And I think that the EU and NATO and all the actors that kind of contribute to European security have to be flexible to find these solutions. And one final thing about the European Parliament election, of course, is worrying, the results. But at the same time, it's important to have in mind that still the established parties have the majority in the parliament. Sometimes we give too much attention to the far right. It's really a crisis in France, but not in every country. It was actually quite positive in Sweden. But of course, it's a difference between European Parliament election and national elections. Yes. But I think, so I will end on a positive note in all these challenges. So thank you.